The Stuff is a wonderfully bizarre 1985 science fiction dark comedy, written, produced and directed by Larry Cohen, whose previous work included Q the Winged Serpent. It's a quite unusual film that rather heavy-handedly deals with the subject of American consumerism at a time when consumerism and the rise of Reaganomics in America were at an absolute peak. The Stuff is a mysterious substance that by chance is also magically delicious, and is not only fat-free but is full of energy, doesn't stain, and is seemingly available in endless amounts. The main plot of the film follows ex-FBI agent Mo Rutherford, who's hired by a conglomerate of food manufacturers to find out where the stuff is coming from, and more importantly to find out what it is, and to attempt to sabotage it if possible. As Mo begins to dig into exactly what the stuff is, it quickly becomes apparent that it may be more than just really good ice cream, and things quickly devolve into a race against time to stop the stuff from potentially taking over the world. There is also an additional subplot that eventually ties into the main plot, following a young boy called Jason, who's repulsed by the stuff, which is unusual because the stuff is shown to be highly addictive. The film opens as well with one of the most heavy-handed sequences I've ever seen put to film. It begins with a cold open on a snowy work site where a worker happens across a small puddle of the stuff on the floor and completely at random decides to dip his finger into the puddle and taste some, which is something no human being would ever do. Further still, after tasting some of the stuff, he then calls a workmate over who gives him some of the stuff to try. They both then have a lengthy exposition back and forth, basically explaining that the stuff could be really popular if they were to sell it, and that while it could be dangerous, let's sell it. The only way it could have been any more heavy-handed would have been if they were to have delivered all of the dialogue directly to camera, breaking the fourth wall. And this isn't the only example of exposition just being completely thrown out there to advance the plot rather than taking the more subtle approach of showing and not telling. I mentioned earlier that the stuff's main message is a comment on consumerism, and in that respect it's an element of the film that is actually handled absolutely superbly. The stuff is absolutely everywhere in this film. There are billboards, cardboard displays, tubs and tubs of the stuff in the backgrounds of the shots. There's street art, and we even get to see several faux ad campaigns pushing the stuff. It's an astounding attention to detail, and it really feels like the stuff has taken over the world. It pretty much plays the stuff as a metaphor for consumerism, with this creeping, suffocating, relentless substance that quite literally takes the humanity out of humanity. Which is a really nice touch, and a real credit to the quality of the writing. It's fairly consistent on the style it chooses pretty much all the way up to the third act, when Mo enlists some additional militaristic help in furthering his investigations. At that point the film sort of spirals into a bit of tonal whiplash with its characters, but even at that point it maintains itself at a very entertaining pace. While the script and the story are arguably two of the best parts of this film, the direction by contrast is shocking, with there being several points that I can remember where actors randomly walk into the shot in an incredibly fake and unsubtle way, and everything for the most part just seems a bit aimless. You really kind of feel for the most part that a lot of the scenes just sort of exist to get us to the next scene, rather than it flowing seamlessly and naturally as the story progresses. Not that this is a difficult watch, mind, quite the opposite. It's an incredibly zippy 87-minute runtime, and it really didn't feel anywhere near that long. I think one of the things that does help this film speed by is the absolute prime examples of good bad acting on display in this film. It's not quite as shockingly awful as The Room, but it is incredibly staged, very over the top, and just not believable at all. There are a couple of moderately good performances from extras in this production, but the camp factor is very high, and it definitely helps push the story along at a good pace. Because of this, I find myself in two minds about whether to praise the film for being this ahead of its time in being both almost dreamlike and a faithful modernising tribute to the invasion films of the 50s. In particular, I drew a lot of parallels to films like both incarnations of The Thing and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or whether I'm just giving it too much credit, and it's actually just a bit of a melodramatic, ill-directed, poorly acted B-movie with a semi-decent script. Though I'm inclined to believe the former. Cohen has a long history with cinema, and while he doesn't have as many credits as the likes of Roger Corman, what films he has produced and directed in the past have always seemed to have their tongue firmly planted in their cheek. The cinematography is okay, but nothing really to write home about. Ultimately, it's pretty standard for productions around the time, but there are at least a couple of more visually pleasing stylised moments that I thought were actually quite impressive. It must also be mentioned that the practical special effects in this film are an absolute rollercoaster of peaks and troughs, with most of the practical effects involving the stuff being particularly astounding for the time and definitely a highlight of the production. But other effects, particularly any effects involving people or animals, are arguably some of the worst effects I've seen in a film made in the 80s. Though they did raise a few laughs with me, even though that may not have been the original intention. The soundtrack for this production is a bit of a mixed bag, with Anthony Guffin heading up the main incidental music and Richard Seaman fronting all of the commercial and advertising jingles. The incidental music is well written, if not a little on the stock side, but it ultimately works well in pushing the film in the right direction. The advertising music, however, is a pure slice of 80s synth music, and it's very, very catchy. It complements the visuals nicely, and would definitely be something I would love to have on my shelf. The stuff was released on Blu-ray in 2014 by Arrow Video, and I must say Arrow continue to impress me time after time. This release is no exception. With a good naturalistic level of film grain and tremendously rich colour palette, this print is crisp and arguably the best way you will ever see this film. The Blu-ray also comes with an expansive set of extra features, which I found to be very interesting, and it really helped flesh out the ideas and concepts that this film puts out. I've always said that cinema doesn't necessarily have to be complex, subtle and challenging. Sometimes it can just keep it simple and have some fun around a core message. And the stuff most definitely falls into that category. With its heavy-handed approach to its subject, ridiculous acting and over-the-top cheap special effects, it's just a fun movie that I enjoy, and I can recommend checking it out if you're looking for something a little bit different.